Democratic Party. So, this is a brief history of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party of today is the oldest functioning political party in the world. So we see that not only does the United States has the oldest written constitution that is still in use of all the countries in the world, it also happens to have the oldest functioning political party. It was founded in 1792 by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Madison does not get enough credit for the organizational work that he did. Thomas Jefferson might have been the writer of the Declaration of Independence. He might have been a very creative thinker, but he was not a very effective organizer. Madison was the real organizer behind the Democratic-Republican Party, but as I said, he doesn't get enough credit for it. So this party competed for a time with the other major party, which was the Federalist Party. In the mid-1820s, the party split into the Democratic Party led by Andrew Jackson and the National Republicans led by John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. So the Democratic Party of today is therefore known as the party of Jefferson and Jackson, and Madison is not to be found in the credits. Major Democratic voting constituencies. So this refers to large groups that are important for Democrats, particularly when it comes to elections and winning elections. Minorities since the 1960s nationwide and since the 1880s in the North. So during the great era of political machines, late 1870s throughout the 1880s and 1890s, you have minorities who have immigrated from European countries like Ireland, Greece, Italy, Poland, the Russian Empire. So people from those areas at the time were considered minorities, didn't have a whole lot of political power, needed help even after they became citizens, and political machines supplied people with food, clothing, jobs, entertainment in exchange for votes. And so the Democratic Party, which ran most of these political machines of big cities like Chicago, New York, Boston, actually ingratiated itself to the poor. So the poor and minorities, as it was understood back then in northeastern and the upper Midwestern parts of the United States, particularly in big cities, became major Democratic constituents. Then you also have union members. Unions grow late in the 19th century as the country is industrializing rapidly, and certainly the preferences of labor, the interests of labor, are represented by the Democratic Party. Full-time government workers, particularly since the second half of the 20th century, as the unions in the private sector began to decline, and today the private sector maybe is only 6% unionized. Government sector worker unions became more and more important. So if you look at the government sector, approximately 40% of government workers are unionized. Also, young and married women. Since the late 60s, early 1970s, we have the age of feminism, so we have a sort of peaceful social revolution, and certainly after the Roe versus Wade decision, when Democrats become champions of pro-choice and Republicans become pro-life. So there's quite a split, and we see presidential election after presidential election, significant gender gap, which is particularly stark when it comes to young unmarried women. And of course, immigrants from poor countries. I'm talking about first-generation immigrants. Cuba is the exception. Cuban immigrants, many of them fled from communism for ideological reasons. And Democrats are a party that is left of center. And so anything that smacks of leftism was a no-no for first-generation Cuban immigrants who tend to identify with Republicans and interests of business, even though they themselves might not have been business people and might not have had a realistic shot of becoming rich. Nevertheless, they identified with the values of economic freedom, free enterprise, low taxes, low regulations, because those were the values that stood in opposition to communism. So, to recap, minorities, the poor, union members, full-time government employees, young unmarried women, immigrants from poor countries, these are major democratic constituents. And one of the most interesting things that happened over the last 3 decades with the Democratic Party is the party itself at the national level has become more pro-corporate. In other words, it moved away from the interests of most of these groups and moved towards becoming a second pro-business party, a second Republican Party. And while all of this is happening economically, nationally and especially internationally, as the Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, is now a booster of global business. At the same time, almost schizophrenically, it continues to play toward interests of the unions. So these policies are economically and logically incompatible. On one hand, total openness to immigration, total openness toward foreign trade, and at the same time trying to appeal to unions who have traditionally supported serious restrictions on immigration because they wanted to keep labor prices up. They wanted to keep wages up. The only way to realistically keep wages up is to limit the supply of labor, because no one has repealed the law of supply and demand. And so it's interesting how, starting with Bill Clinton, the Democrats have moved into an ever pro-corporate direction while trying to maintain the loyalties of the poor people and union members. Thank you for your attention.